What was your scariest weather-related experience? Hi all, it's Em. I hope you enjoyed today's video and stay safe out there. Story 1. While driving to California from Mississippi, we got caught in a huge desert storm somewhere in Arizona, or possibly New Mexico. There was a lot of rain and wind, but it started off normally enough. After about 5 minutes, though, it started getting crazy. The dirt and sand was so dry that all the water coming down was kicking it up more than soaking it. So after a few minutes, both sides of the road were completely hidden by dust, going up about 30 feet. And then above that was just rain, with the freeway cutting through it. Looked like Moses parting the sea, except it was a freeway parting a giant dust cloud. So that was kind of neat, but then it got intense. Every time lightning flashed, you could see into the dust clouds, and there were multiple tornadoes and dust devils on each side of us. Deciding to take shelter, we pulled into a motel that was ahead of us and ran into the lobby, along with about 4 other people who had come off the road. Just as we were getting into the lobby, the storm really took off, and we started getting hail too. One guy slipped in the parking lot and started bleeding everywhere, and me and my husband had to dash outside to literally drag him into the building. Then us, the guy, the others from the road, and about 6 people in the hotel, including the staff, just huddled in the lobby, watching the security cameras feed from outside on their desk computer. One by one, the cameras were getting taken out by hail or wind, until eventually it was all just static and howling wind and dust outside the windows. It was like something from a disaster movie. I'll never forget it. Somebody commented explaining, "You were in haboob. From something so scary, it sure is a silly name." I'm sorry, but if I had to tell someone the scariest moment in my life was when I survived through a haboob, I don't think I would ever tell this story. I have to give major props to OP and her husband for going to help the person who fell through. Now they can tell people they saved someone from boobs. I mean a haboob. Story 2. Tornado season can get pretty scary if you don't have a plan or place to go, or if you have a person who is panicking. A couple years ago, Oklahoma had a really bad tornado season. It was around the time of the May 20th tornado, so everyone in my family is pretty good about handling tornadoes, except my dad. He goes into this panic and rage mode where he just has to take control, and he's freaking out and he's yelling, and he's just generally running around like a chicken with its head off. There comes a time when he shouts, "Everyone get in the car, we are leaving." My mom tried to put up some fight, but in the end, we all piled into the car and took off down the road. Everything is all fine and dandy. We found a good place to sit and wait out the storm. Then he decides we have to move. He starts turning down all these different roads, and we are listening to the radio. And the radio is basically saying that if you are in a car, you need to get out and find immediate shelter. Well, my dad says screw that. We keep driving. The rain starts to come down on the car harder and harder until we literally cannot see in front of us, so we have to pull over. The wind was so loud and it was rocking the car. I start hyperventilating, and I'm pretty sure I blacked out for like a minute. Eventually, we found our way back to our house as the storm died down. Turns out we were in between 2 storm cells. We have a shelter now. I know people react very differently to scary situations, but I would expect for people living in Oklahoma that he would have learned how to better react to these by now, and would not freak out so much that he would put his family in danger. I'm just happy they were able to get to safety in time, before anybody got seriously hurt. Story 3. I posted this a few years ago when someone asked me about the historic flooding in Charleston, which got me gold unexpectedly. It still applies here. The last 2 nights have been living heck for me. Water was coming in through the floor everywhere in the house. I used literally all of my towels to clean it up, and even had to sacrifice one of my blankets. Sorry, Spider-Man, you took one for the team. The worst part wasn't the flooding though, because the city's water system was so backed up with water. Raw sewage came up through my toilet and bathtub. In less than 30 minutes, the bathtub was completely filled with disgusting brown water, with God knows what floating in it. I was up all night, actually all night, meaning from sunset until early dawn, scooping buckets of the stuff from the tub and dumping it outside the bathroom window. When dawn rolled around, the rain stopped, and it took several hours for the sewage to go back down the drain, during which I took naps in 1-hour increments to wake up and check to see if it was rising or going down. I've won the battle for now, but I don't feel like I've really won. When raw sewage is involved, nobody wins, everybody loses. Someone commented, "I was in Colombia as a student when the big flood happened. We didn't have classes for a week, no water for a few days, but luckily had power. The rivers were insanely high, and I still remember my friend's house almost being underwater. Luckily, they were on a hill. Just right down the street from his house, there was a 2-story house completely underwater. Story 4. In my 20s, I used to build farm irrigation systems, those great big ones with multiple humps you see in fields. We had one rule: if we heard thunder, we were done. They are basically great big lightning rods. On one system, we were on the second day of building the system, so there were already 3 spans up. We're working on the 4th span when it suddenly starts getting bad real quick. There was a barn close by me, so me, my coworker, and my boss hightailed it over to it. Within minutes of getting to the barn, the farmer showed up mad. He was paying us to build that system, and he wants it done now. My boss grinned at him and told him we would if he'd stand there with at least one hand touching the irrigation system at all times. Farmer got even angrier and was cursing and screaming. The wind and rain were going crazy, constantly changing direction. Sounded like the barn roof could go any second. Then, multiple blitzes of lightning hit the system right in a row. It was super loud, and we could see the lightning dancing along to it where it connected to the well that gave the system its water. Farmer shut his mouth real quick when that happened. Then, just as quickly as the storm formed, it was gone. Field was way too muddy for us to work in, so we had to let it dry out before we could move our crane back into it. Never did get any farmer to take us up on keeping their hands on the system, lol. Yeah, it seems like some people really love to yell at workers to keep working, even if the conditions are conducive for whatever reason. Then as soon as you say, sure, as long as you are out here with me, they realize it's not workable and finally accept what they're wrong. My guess is, though, that this dude didn't even apologize once. Story 5. As a Canadian, I guess I can say the most dangerous weather experience we've had where I lived was a giant ice storm in 1998. Everything was frozen over. Power lines were cut and bent over, cars were frozen over, trees broke and fell into people's houses. People living in the outskirts of the city with farmland were almost completely isolated with barely any heat or communication. I was a kid, and I vividly remember my dad taking out a radio and trying to dial to a station for news and emergency reports in an era where lots of info just came from a TV or the newspaper. But of course, I'm Canadian. Terrible winters are a normal occurrence. So while that ice storm fricked up my home city for a while, most of the people were like, yeah, this is fine. You know what scares the crap out of everyone instead? The one time where we experienced a tiny earthquake for like 3 seconds. It destroyed nothing. And yet everyone and their grandmother was like, holy freaking crap, an earthquake, oh my god, including me. It was the scariest experience I've ever felt. Not the most dangerous, but I definitely thought I was going to die for no reason. Somebody commented, LMAO, I just slept through a 7.9 not long ago. It was the tsunami warning that woke me up. Story 6. I was training for a marathon and had an 8-mile run planned after work on the C&O Canal. I checked the weather after work and all looked well. I'm 3 miles out and the sky starts getting dark and I feel raindrops. A couple minutes later and I'm stuck in the worst thunderstorm I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm alone on the canal and the only way to get back is to run 3 miles back the way I came. It's raining sideways so hard I cannot see 2 feet in front of me. The canal is flooded with water and I can barely run. Not to mention, I'm at a bend in the canal, where it just drops off right into the Potomac River. It was utterly terrifying. So I'm running and walking as fast as I can while my glasses are covered in rain, and I don't have a dry inch of clothing anywhere to wipe them off. I was so scared. Lightning and thunder is constant. Then I hear crack, and a giant limb falls off a nearby tree, crashing to the ground. I wanted to stop so bad and just hide, but I knew I needed to get back to my car. It rained the entire 3-mile run back to my car. I cried when I got back to my car. I was soaked, covered in mud, and shaking like a leaf. Only time it's ever happened to me. Someone commented, adding to my list of reasons to not go running. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of running. So the next time I consider it, I think I'll just re-listen to this episode, so at least I have a valid reason not to go. Story 7. There was a huge storm that my dad and I were watching while standing in the garage with the garage door open. Finally, the storm got so intense that the power went out while the garage door was still open. My dad, whose jokes are sometimes in poor taste, just put his hand over his mouth and said, "Oh crap." Me as a 10-year-old said, What? My dad said the power went out and the garage is still open. He sounded worried, so I frantically asked why that mattered. He simply said, well, it creates a negative pressure causing the house to explode. I started crying and ran to find my mom. He thought it was hilarious. Someone commented, when I was in K through 8, somebody somewhere in the school hierarchy heard that leaving a building's door open during a tornado would protect it from a negative pressure explosion. I remember the principal going through the school during a tornado warning, grumbling about some people believing anything they hear, while shutting all the doors that had been propped open. Story 8. When I was 11, one summer, it was just my 2 sisters and me home when a tornado came. We lived in the country, so no alarms were heard. It was a thunderstorm that just kept getting worse and darker. We knew we had problems when in the middle of the worst part of the storm, all the wind died, like someone literally flipped a switch. I looked at the highest point of some trees and could see the highest leaves sitting still. A few moments later, we could start to hear the distant sound of what sounded like a train, but no railroad tracks anywhere near. That is the sign of a tornado. We hauled butt into the basement, freaking out. We could see the tornado come across some farm fields into our next-door neighbor's backyard, where it picked up a barrel, and as it came toward our place, it hopped our house, tore the antenna off, but no other damage. Someone commented, I can't even imagine. I've never witnessed or lived through a tornado, but they scare the ever-loving crap out of me. Story 9. I was in middle school and had some sort of after-school event. It was late January and had been lightly snowing all day and really cloudy. I called my mom on the phone at school to let her know that I was done. I was sitting outside leaning on a bike rack while waiting for her to show up. I then hear thunder crack. I'd never even heard of thunder blizzards before, but I experienced one that day. In the course of maybe 5 minutes, a fog rolled in. The snow got super heavy, the wind began blowing hard, and lightning and thunder was going off every few seconds. I moved away from the bike racks and into a small alcove to get out of the cold wind. After maybe 30 seconds from leaving the bike rack, lightning struck the bike rack I had just been leaning against. That day was the most scared I've ever been from a storm. Growing up in the Midwest, thunderstorms and blizzards are common, so I wasn't afraid of them. But both at the same time, combined with lightning striking where I had been, just really got to me. I've also never ever heard of a thunder blizzard before, but it sounds terrifying. Hopefully OP was able to get back inside the school and wait it out until they were able to get home safely. Story 10. Woke up one morning to my dog barking for breakfast. I hadn't slept well, so I was kinda in a daze and went out into our screen room and gave her a bowl of food. It took me a second to come online, but when I did, I noticed it was dark as frick outside and there was a loud whooshing noise all around me. It was like standing in a wind tunnel. I looked over at my dog and she was freaking out in the corner, but refused to leave her food. Took me a second of yelling to convince her to abandon the kibble. But once things cleared up, I turned on the news and realized a tornado had basically gone right over my house. Short version, I fed my dog outside in the middle of a small tornado. Someone commented, I know this was probably a scary experience for you, and I'm glad you and your dog were safe, but that's probably one of the funniest things I've ever heard. Just the thought of you barely feeding your dog while a tornado swarms around you, and your dog caring more about food than something 100 times scarier than a vacuum. Story 11. When I was in kindergarten, my parents went to a work dinner, so my siblings and I were watching Nickelodeon. The TV signal went out, so we went to another TV to watch Monsters, Inc. Then the power went out, and an incredibly loud rain of hail pelted the house, and we all hid in the bathroom waiting for my parents. Another time, at the same age, tornado sirens started going off, so my family stayed in the bathroom for probably 7 hours through the night. Once we were okay to leave, we found out that all the windows were broken. The yard was a disaster. Drove around town and every sign was on the ground. Neighbor's trampoline was on the roof. Crazy crap, but now tornado sirens go off and I'm outside watching. Midwest life. Someone commented, that's me. My phone goes off with a tornado warning, and I go looking for it. Story 12. This one morning, I was preparing for middle school, and it was 8:15. The sun would have been up, but instead there were these really dark clouds. I could hear thunder, but the sound was muffled, probably from inside the clouds. I went to the bus a bit scared as the sky seemed to get worse, and it started raining really hard and heavy. Apparently, a tornado had formed near the area, which was enough to make a few kids on the bus start crying. While the bus was stopped to pick a kid up, lightning strikes near a tree, missing it. The sound that followed was loud AF, and seeing it was really scary. We later had a tornado drill 30 minutes into the first period, but the scariness had worn off by then. Someone commented, when I was 11, I made my mom take me to get my first iPod during a pretty bad storm. On our way back, lightning struck the field right next to us. The crack was deafening. My mom and the cop in front of us had to pull over for a minute. If you're not sure how loud a lightning strike is, I like to equate it to a gunshot. Even if you're familiar with the noise, it can be really scary to know just how close it was to you. Story 13. I'm from rural North Dakota, and 10 years ago we had a blizzard that trapped my family and I into our home for 4 days. We had snowdrifts and feet-high negative 30-degree weather, and we lived 15 miles from the town. It's pretty typical for North Dakota. It wasn't scary for me and my 3 siblings. We had a blast. My brother and I had a great time jumping off our roofs into drifts and making tunnels through our yard. What makes this crazy? My parents didn't tell us until we were adults, but there was only 2 days worth of food in the house. My parents didn't eat anything for 4 days to make sure my siblings and I were fed. We couldn't figure out why my mom cried when the roads finally opened up. Now I understand it was fear of relief. My parents are good people and they sacrifice for us. If you can, go hug your mom. Story 14. At one point, I got up and peeked out the window. There were strange green flashes going off all over. I realized they were power transformers exploding. Microburst winds and a thunderstorm. I knew the storm was coming, so I ran to my neighbor's house to make sure her dog was away. He was. As I turned to run back, the wind came out of nowhere, and in the few hundred feet I ran home, 6 or 7 trees and large branches came down all around me in a matter of seconds. One huge branch missed me by about 10 feet. The sound of the rush of wind, then cracking and crashing of trees is something I'll never forget. Someone commented, "Microbursts are not to be messed with." I'm studying to be a pilot and they scare the crap out of me. Story 15. Walking home from a friend's house and nearly got hit by lightning. The bolt was really thick, bright, and loud, and I could taste the burning air. I'd say it struck about 400 feet behind my house. Then somebody commented, "Had a lightning strike hit my neighbor's house during monsoon thunderstorms in 2011. Their maid was outside getting clothes from the clothesline and was struck. She survived, but the silver chain she was wearing melted and stuck to her neck, causing burns." Story 16. Watching Hurricane Harvey roll in, knowing I was unable to evacuate and I might lose my home or not survive the night. The power went out at about 9:30 p.m. on August 25th. And the rest of the night was spent in total darkness. I was huddled in my room with a stray cat I had just rescued, listening to the sounds of the wind howling, and power lines, large trees, and rooftops being knocked to the ground. I live so close to the bayfront that I can jog there in less than 3 minutes. Geez, OP, that sounds terrible. I know some people who have gone through major hurricanes, and they said the scariest part was just the waiting, not knowing what's going to happen, what to do if the worst case scenario happens, and who can even help you at that point? Story 17. Dry lightning while climbing one of Colorado's 14ers. July 2015 on Mount Beardstadt, about 500 feet from the vertical summit. The hiking party wasn't hit, but lightning struck about 300 feet from us. Someone commented, "Always get off the mountains before 12 p.m., kids. I'm glad you made it out unscathed." Story 18. I don't care if you're in the middle of the floodplains or in the middle of an urban area. Flash floods are freaking scary. Someone commented, "Some communities never come back from a flood. Some people's entire lives are ruined and everything they own is washed away. Floods are freaking brutal." I live near a pretty big river, so after flash floods, it has sometimes gotten so high that it floods part of the highway, which is terrifying. Because in theory, those cars there are just stuck on the flooded highway. Or they can even get pulled into the river. Story 19. Top of Glider Fatch, a mountain in Snowdonia, midwinter whiteout storm. Walked onto an ice sheet and the gale started to push me sideways on the ice towards the cliff. In all, I guess I was pushed 10 yards by the intense wind. I fell flat on my face and crawled until I was in deep snow and could get some traction under my boots. Story 20. Whiteout snow while driving. Literally couldn't see anything past the car in front. Had to pull over and wait for it to end. Someone commented, "What makes it more horrifying are the dumb butts that drive like it's a clear blue sky." Yep, I'm the kind of driver who will go like 10 or more below the speed limit, especially if I don't have my snow tires on. But I've seen people just completely below the speed limit, and I just wait to see their cars skid across the highway. Story 21. I was living by myself when Hurricane Charlie went through Florida. I was huddled in my house with a candle, power had gone out, just listening to a hellish maelstrom shake my old wood house. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.